This piece was originally published in December 2017.
I prefer my opinion to yours.
This piece was published on my birthday as a gift to me. Thank you, Eurogamer. I didn't know you cared. Jokes aside, I've never read this piece by Robert Purchase. I'll leave a link to the article in the description. I'm gonna write my thoughts as I go through it. Everyone trusts Yoda. But of course, Yoda wasn't even born yet, so the idea must have involved Mr. Blinky Eyes himself. Spoiler alert. Forget about Obsidian's sequel for a moment.
I can't do that, I'm afraid.
We felt like Yoda was the ultimate. Everyone trusts Yoda, James Olin tells me, lead designer of Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. Of course you trust him.
Look at that face! Come on, look at that face! You look at him!
James Olin was also lead designer of Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, Neverwinter Nights and Dragon Age Origins, and director of Star Wars The Old Republic, the online game. These days he's creative director of BioWare Austin, and he's working on Anthem. The initial twist in the first 2-page concept we had for Knights of the Old Republic 2 was you were going to be trained by a Yoda-like figure, Olin says, someone from the Yoda race. That character was going to train you in the first part of the game, but then you were going to discover this Yoda figure was actually not the good Yoda you expected. He was training you to essentially be his enforcer, a dark lord to conquer the universe, and he was going to become the main villain, dun dun dun. In the video I published called Buying HK47, viewer Fatal Changeling left this comment wondering how many thought HK47 was going to be like C-3PO. I guess kinda that idea on steroids. But I wonder if this was shared with Obsidian Entertainment since it does sound awfully familiar, albeit without the Saturday morning cartoon Let's Take Over the Galaxy thing. From the death of BioWare's Knights of the Old Republic 2, Mass Effect and Dragon Age were born. In the preceding paragraphs, it's explained that this KoTOR 2 was cut because BioWare wanted their own IP. They didn't own Star Wars, and they didn't own Dungeons & Dragons. So they said, we'll make our own Star Wars. That became Mass Effect. But then they also said, we'll make our own Dungeons & Dragons. That became Dragon Age. Strangely enough, before we picked Star Wars, I remember Ray Muzica coming into my office and throwing a couple of books on my desk and telling me to read them because we were negotiating with the authors, Olin recalls. And one of them was a book, A Game of Thrones by George R.R. Martin. Coincidentally, Obsidian also seriously considered the Game of Thrones a few years later. And who ended up making a Game of Thrones video game in the end? Telltale Games, ladies and gentlemen. What LucasArts had initially expected was us to do a paint-over of Baldur's Gate, and it was going to be a 2D side-scrolling Star Wars game. There's gotta be an alternate universe out there where this happened. They go on to explain that BioWare has no interest in making down-to-earth, non-epic storylines. But there's enough epic things going on in the Star Wars films with Luke and Vader. So they stumbled upon Star Wars Tales of the Jedi by Dark Horse Comics, set thousands of years before the films and well out of the way. They just had to bump the timeline a little bit further because the comics had proto-sabers and starships with sails. I've never read these comics myself, but the last part sounds like something out of Magus XLR. And hey presto, it had a perfect setting for its own story about a ragtag group taking on an empire. A storyline that Star Wars can't seem to get away from. The twist of the player being the villain came from Cameron Topher, who left BioWare shortly after, was replaced by Casey Hudson, founded Beamdog, and went on to remaster BioWare games. They really wanted a twist in this game. M. Night Shyamalan will be proud. It says here the twist was in the very first 2-page Word document for the game. The character itself, that would be called Revan, was nowhere near conception yet. BioWare didn't spend much time on Revan at all. Darth Revan was less of a character because he was going to be the player, so we didn't actually want to develop him too much, Olin says. Darth Malak was the one we spent more time giving a character arc to, and a background to, and a personality to. We know, trust us, we know. KoTOR 2 made it abundantly clear that Revan from KoTOR 1 really didn't have anything going for him. People run around talking about how much they love Revan in KoTOR 1 without realizing that without the sequel, he's only two things: the previous Dark Lord of the Sith and the player character. Maybe people are referring to the Revan that's in the Old Republic MMO, but I honestly don't know anything about him, except for the fact that he was basically in jail for like 1,000 years or something. Revan's name took all about 3 seconds to conjure up. The funny thing is, people on message boards will try and guess at the incredible depth we went to name the characters, Olin says. Could Revan be an Old English spelling of Raven? and meaning a dark-haired and thievish person? Could Revan come from the noun Revankism, which means a policy of seeking to retaliate, especially to recover lost territory? I think I flipped through a book and there's a villain in one of my D&D campaigns. A lot of the names came from my old Star Wars campaign I ran as a teenager, called Revanok. And I was like, that's not very good. I'll just lop off the last part. Revan, boom, done. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Mystery solved. You thought it was deeper than that. I thought it was deeper than that. No. Fiddlestick all behind the name. Imagine Chris Avalon being asked about Kreia and Adan Kai and he's like, no, you don't understand. That was a boating accident.
What?
The Millennium Falcon is an important character, and the Ebon Hawk was an area you could have, as Olin says, more intimate conversations and character moments. Exactly, which is why those old KoTOR videos on YouTube perplexed me. People would record conversations happening anywhere. The original video of HK-47 talking about killing Jedi by the Princess J was recorded in the middle of the Duxon jungle, right next to that Mandalorian you get to blow up, complete with thunder and rain sound effects. But not everything worked out well. We had to cut an entire planet, he says. We were going to have a planet called Slahedon, which was also from his old D&D campaign. And we actually did the content and built one of the levels for it. It was going to be a gladiator world run by the Hutts, but we were forced to cut that world. I've mentioned this before in past videos, talking about Yuthura Ban and how she's from that planet, and how she would have made a great party member. Maybe as an alternate party member in case you killed Juhani. You had companions to recruit on Tatooine and Kashyyyk, why not Korriban? But then there's Manan. Maybe that was an idea that was floating around that led to that Selkath on the cover art. We also had more endings, he adds, but the endings were expensive, so we had to cut them down. We were going to have multiple endings based on all these different choices you were going to make, a bit like the end of Dragon Age Origins. But it just didn't make any sense. The ending had to be big, epic cinematic moment with space battles and all the rest, so we cut it down to 2. If memory serves, people were able to find some unused audio files pointing at alternate endings, but nothing that didn't involve the Battle of the Starforge. But it makes it sound like they had the ideas for the other endings ready to go. I wish it would have elaborated on what they were. Obsidian, a friend of BioWare's, would make Knights of the Old Republic 2, and independently managed to come up with a strikingly similar story idea. Well, that answers my question from earlier. I've learned that there's only so many ideas in the world, Olin says with a shrug. BioWare's Jade Empire recycled the traitorous Yoda idea too, spoiler alert. BioWare returned to the Old Republic era years later with the huge online game Star Wars The Old Republic. No!